Sad news. Unfortunately, we found out yesterday Damian Lillard is dealing with bug clots, and he will be out indefinitely right now. Man, this sucks to hear, man. Get well soon today, man. You know, it's love always over here. But guys,
Yeah.
what does this mean for the Bucks?
So without Dame, the Bucks are finished.
For sure.
Yeah, so I'm not worried about the Bucks no more.
Yeah, we've been playing without Dame, but Dame's been very attentive, especially for me being the backup point guard for Dame. I've been learning a lot, and he's been on me, challenging me to elevate my game and be more consistent, be a leader. And honestly, with that said, it's been helping me mentality-wise coming into the game. Having force, getting downhill, and just trusting everyone and everything. So Dame's been off the court, but he's been more so with us still and talking to us, and he's been a great leader off the floor.
Dame is we don't know the timeline on him, so just me having to step up to make the most of the opportunity and just be who I am and step into the role and not shy away and be as passive as I've been sometimes. So just being aggressive, honestly.
When news of Damian Lillard's blood clot first broke, the narrative surrounding the Milwaukee Bucks was that they were finished. And of course, with that comes the age-old Giannis trade rumors. But I'm not gonna lie, of all the times the media pushed this propaganda, this one felt the most real. Because when you hear the term blood clot, you associate that with a season-ending injury, or even a career-ending injury in some cases. And when you combine that with the fact that this news broke just 25 days before the NBA playoffs, it really did feel like the beginning of the end for the Milwaukee Bucks. But fortunately for Milwaukee fans, and just fans of the sport, recent reports suggest that Lillard could still potentially make a return this season, which is massive news for a team actively competing for a championship. But lost in the flurry of these Dame headlines is who is currently stepping up in his absence. And no, I'm not talking about Giannis, but he is averaging an absurd 33, 11, and 8 on 63% from the field since Dame was first sidelined on March 20th. But rather, I'm alluding to the backup point guard tandem of Ryan Rollins and Kevin Porter Jr., who have both stepped up in massive ways throughout this span. So like the complete basketball nerd that I am, I decided to spend days watching film on both of these guys to break down every small nuance in their game for your enjoyment. So with all the boring, I have to record an intro to set the theme sort of stuff out of the way, let's talk ball, starting with Ryan Rollins. On the offensive side of things, Ryan's best attribute is easily his ability to finish around the rim, as he's currently converting on 67% of his attempts within the restricted area, putting him in the 81st percentile of rim finishers at his position. And to me, the biggest reason for his success around the basket is his IQ, because he's very timely when attacking driving angles, always noticing where the opposing team's help is coming from, attacking when the big is away from the rim, identifying weak transition defense. Simply put, Rollins just knows when he has an opportunity to attack the basket, and more often than not, he takes full advantage. And he pairs this elite IQ with sneaky athleticism and a 6'10 wingspan that allows him to outstretch his arms past defenders and finish at difficult angles using either his left or right hand. But he does prefer to go left, as he loves to use a right to left between the legs hesitation, both in the half court and in transition to get to that hand. And when he attacks right, he goes to a low gather dribble with his left before shielding the ball across his body and finishing on the right side. The only real struggle for Rollins as an interior finisher is that he doesn't do the best when it comes to finishing through the chest of a bigger defender. He'd much rather just finish around them, but this is honestly completely normal for a player of his size. And don't get it confused. Just because he can't always finish through the chest of Ivica Zubac or Isaiah Hartenstein, it doesn't mean that he can't finish through contact, because he's certainly capable of doing so. But his overall ability to generate rim pressure is such a massive contribution to a team that ranks second to last in the NBA in paint touches and 4th to last in points in the paint. This team just struggles to touch the paint outside of Dame, Giannis, and occasionally Kuz and KPJ, which is a big reason for why their offense can go stagnant at times. And it also probably explains why the Bucks offense is 1.9 points per 100 possessions better with Ryan on the floor, 3rd highest on the team behind only Giannis and Gary Trent Jr. But taking a few steps out of the paint and into the mid-range, Rollins has yet to really find a niche in this area. His floater is decent, and he is capable of knocking down the occasional turnaround or step-back jumper, but these definitely aren't the types of looks that a team should be relying on from him. And for the most part, this area just isn't a part of his game yet. He'd much rather go all the way to the rim or shoot a 3. And I think much of this has to do with his lack of self-creation at an NBA level, as he generally relies on the gravity of others to get off his shots. But there's nothing wrong with that, because it makes him a more efficient player, as his ability to space the floor, especially alongside Giannis, is invaluable, knocking down about 41% of his attempts from long range on the season, which is a percentage that slightly increases to 42% off the catch. And many of these looks are just him capitalizing off of the space of his team or the gravity of a guy like Giannis. I just wish he'd move off the ball a little more on the perimeter instead of just sitting in the corner. But at the same time, part of that is a schematic issue, because I feel like it's almost by design for guys to sit in the corner within the Bucks offense so they don't interfere with Dame or Giannis's driving angles, which I don't agree with, but that's another video for another day. And every now and again, we do see Rollins occasionally take advantage of a defender overplaying him or underplaying him, which leads us to Ryan's playmaking abilities, where his lack of self-creation can come back to bite him. Because odds are, if a player can't create for themselves, they can't create for their teammates. And in the case of Ryan Rollins, this can be true at times, as he's not the most advanced playmaker, and the timing of some of his reads is just off, which has been blatantly obvious in all of his attempts to run a 2-man action with Giannis recently. Plus, there are moments where he can struggle to set up the team's offense, especially if opposing defenses throw any sort of ball pressure his way. Because against tight ball pressure, Rollins tends to make poor decisions, and at the beginning of the season, he'd have possessions where he'd struggle to even advance the ball past half court. And considering he's listed as a point guard, it makes these issues seem 10 times worse. But that's where the misconception lies. Point guard. Ryan Rollins isn't a natural point guard. Coming out of high school, he was listed as a 2 guard. He never averaged more than 4 assists per game during his time at Toledo. And even a couple of weeks ago, Doc Rivers told the media that Ryan isn't a natural point guard.
He's not a natural point guard. I mean, we don't have one. That guy is, Dame, and he's not here right now. So we're trying to do our best without the natural, just a point guard. You can see the difference sometimes, the difference in Kolik and those guys running and what we have. But he's been absolutely wonderful for us.
And Doc's right. Ryan has been terrific lately, and this is in large part due to his new role. Since Dame's been out, notice that in lineups that include Ryan and Giannis is typically the guy bringing the ball up and running the offense, while Rollins fills an off-ball role as a secondary initiator in the half court, which is exactly what he should be doing. Because as we mentioned earlier, Rollins is at his best when he's capitalizing off the spacing created by Giannis and the rest of the team. And he does this not only by cashing in his threes, but by making reads when attacking off a closeout, or making reads when getting downhill. Just having another guy who can get 2 feet into the painted area and spray out to open shooters is a massive plus. And this is something Ryan brings to the offense in this role. We didn't really see that a lot from him earlier in the season because he was miscast as the primary creator for the second unit. But even with that in mind, Rollins has gotten noticeably more comfortable with the ball in his hands as the season has gone on, and you can see that in the way he's been breaking down defenders lately. So while the primary initiating skills and ability to self-create may not quite be there yet at an NBA level, we have to remember that he's only 22 years old and he's just begun to get quality NBA reps. Those skills will develop with more time. But with offense out of the way, let's talk about where Ryan Rollins really makes his presence felt. On the defensive side of the basketball. At 6'3", 180, with an aforementioned 6'10" wingspan, Rollins uses his length to his full advantage, as he applies elite full-court ball pressure against opposing guards to take teams out of their offense. And in the half-court, he's great at keeping his man in front of him at the point of attack, with a solid understanding of where his help defense is at all times, doing a nice job of funneling his matchups right into his help at the rim. And when you combine his tremendous length with his active hands, you get a player who's phenomenal at disrupting opposing ball handlers off penetration, and he often rips guys before they can even get to their spot, which is also a testament to Rollins' anticipation when defending the ball. In terms of screen navigation, he's not the greatest at getting around the initial point of contact, but given how long his arms are, he's never really out of the play either, and because of that, he can make some pretty impressive recoveries. Plus, when Rollins can see the ball screen coming ahead of time, he does a good job of flipping his hips towards the sideline to ice the screen and prevent penetration in the middle of the floor. And again, his long arms allow him to seamlessly get back in front of his man. But it isn't just guards that Rollins is capable of defending, because despite his smaller size, his combination of length and body control makes him decently effective against bigger offensive players. And if you ever watch him battle those types of guys in the mid to low post, you'd be impressed with how often he's able to fight them for positioning and get over the top of post-ups to cause a deflection or force a turnover. But as good as this all sounds, he is a young player, and because of that, he can be prone to silly mistakes when defending the ball, as he tends to play his matchups way too close at times and either gets caught with his hand in the cookie jar or taking up a shooter's landing space upon closing out. As for Rollins' defensive impact away from the ball, his positioning is usually pretty good, and he knows when he needs to help versus when to stay home. And one of the more surprising and just flat out impressive aspects of Ryan's defensive prowess is his ability to serve as a weak side low man. Yeah, you heard me right. The 6'3", 180-pound guard can step in as the low man every so often, as his timely rotations on the weak side, fused with his 6'10" wingspan, allow him to provide great verticality at the rim in help if one of Milwaukee's bigs is out on the perimeter, which sounds insane just hearing it come out of my mouth. But as good as his rotations usually are, he does occasionally watch the ball for a little too long and lose his man or defensive positioning. Fortunately, it isn't a frequent habit. And the last thing that Rollins does really well defensively is defend in transition. He's routinely one of the first guys back, which honestly just comes down to sheer effort. And he's also very capable when it comes to tracking players down in transition, often stripping them before they can get into their upward motion, or flat out pinning them off the glass. But all in all, Rollins' all-around defensive capabilities makes him one of the most impactful defenders on the Bucks' current roster. And speaking of impactful, I think it's time we transition to talking about Kevin Porter Jr., starting with his offensive production. And I'm going to begin by saying that this dude is straight up one of the craftiest finishers around the rim that you'll ever see. He's got elite body control that allows him to hang in midair and get off the look that he wants, and he can finish through, around, or right over the top of opposing defenders thanks to his sneaky bounce. But he wouldn't be able to show any of that off if it wasn't for his extremely shifty movements and tight handle, which allows him to break down the man in front of him. And when going to the basket, he loves to hit defenders with a head fake hesitation or spin move to finish on either side, although he'd probably prefer to get back to his left hand. Porter Jr.'s change of speeds and pace when getting into the painted area is also super impressive, as he does a decent job of keeping his dribble alive to maintain penetration before changing speeds and exploding past the defense. And if he does need to pick up his dribble in the lane, he's capable of stopping on a dime at breakneck speed, maintaining his pivot, and using up fakes to still get off a look. But as crafty as he is with the ball in his hands, this can be a blessing and a curse for him, especially around the rim, because sometimes he'll just lose control of the ball in midair, which negatively affects his shot. He also tries to go vertical with bigs and help defenders way more often than he probably should, resulting in him getting sent back around the rim quite often. And although he is capable of the occasional poster, in most cases, his timing is off, and it can look like he's forcing the highlight play. And to stick with that theme, unlike Ryan Rollins, who's very meticulous and calculated with his drives to the basket, KPJ can tend to just throw himself into the lane with no game plan and rely on his talent and skill to bail him out. And because of this, we see a lot of questionable isolations against good defenders with help defense that go absolutely nowhere. And a big reason for that is the fact that he can be way too isocentric. Porter Jr. is really good at breaking down his initial defender, but he's not always surveying the floor to try and identify help defense, and because of this, he often pays the price. This lack of awareness can also hurt him in transition, because if he doesn't have a clean runway for an easy dunk when running the break, he gets so caught up on beating the man in front of him, which creates tunnel vision, as he loves to get into a slow step gather or euro to beat that initial defender on the break, but what he doesn't realize is that allows the help defense to recover in time to contest his shot. And all of these flaws within the interior can affect his efficiency, because for his career, KPJ has typically been above average percentage-wise when it comes to finishing around the rim, but he's been a little more inefficient this season at 60% flat within the restricted area, which ranks in the 42nd percentile of players at his position. But I am willing to cut him some slack, because some of that also might have to do with the adjustment period of playing with a guy like Giannis Antetokounmpo, who's constantly attacking the basket and making it harder for others to put pressure on the rim, because his rim efficiency specifically dropped off upon arrival to the Bucks. So hopefully as time continues to go on, Scoot can again find his rhythm within the interior. But in contrast to his sudden drop-off in rim finishing, is his significantly improved mid-range shooting since becoming a Milwaukee Buck. For his career, Porter Jr. has generally been a below-average mid-range shooter, and in 45 games with the Clippers earlier this season, his 42.4% was completely average, ranking in the 50th percentile amongst players at his position. But with the Bucks, that number has jumped all the way up to 51.9%, putting him in the 95th percentile of players at his position. So why is that? What made his percentage jump that much? Well, I think there's two explanations. For one, given how KPJ likes to operate in the mid-range area, which we'll touch on in a minute, the Bucks' floor spacing has been a massive plus, as Porter Jr. has never been on a team in the top half of the league in three-point efficiency, which limited the amount of space he had to work with. But since getting to Milwaukee at the February 6th trade deadline, the Bucks have been the fourth most efficient team from long range, and on the entire season, they've been the most efficient. So the added floor spacing has definitely helped. But the second reason for Porter Jr.'s mid-range surge with the Bucks is how he's being used. Because he's a player who can create his own shot, the Clippers used to often force-feed KPJ in late shot clock scenarios, essentially pressuring him into creating offense with little to no time on the clock, which is also called a grenade. And many of these grenades came in the mid-range area, which negatively impacted his percentage. Now, before I get crucified by a Clippers fan in the comments section, yes, KPJ would have his moments where he'd eat 10 seconds off the shot clock during one of these isolations. But you also have to account for all the times he was thrown the ball with under 5 seconds left on the shot clock. The Bucks just aren't putting him in these spots, and that's been a massive benefit for him. Context aside though, Porter Jr.'s mid-range creation primarily comes out of pick and roll, where he loves to snake screens and get defenders on his back hip. From here, KPJ is excellent at picking out his spots and getting into a floater or step back jumper. His favorite spot to get to in particular is probably that right elbow, especially after snaking a screen. And typically, it doesn't matter who's in front of Scoot when he gets to that spot, because he can find a way to shoot over anyone. And against bigs specifically, he's got a beautiful leaning fadeaway that he likes to go to. But with that in mind, this can lead to some beyond questionable shot selection. Because as we mentioned before, KPJ has a bit of a tendency to go ISO against the wrong guy, and he can feel like a ball stopper at times. But with the interior and mid-range out of the way, let's discuss Scoot's floor spacing, which, to put it bluntly, has not been good this season, as he's shooting just 31% from deep on the season, and a slightly better, but still putrid 33% off the catch, which is strange, because although KPJ's traditional three-point efficiencies have never jumped off the page, his catch and shoot numbers used to be elite, as he shot an absurd 48.2% from deep off the catch during the 21-22 season, and a slightly regressed, but still impressive, 43.5% during the 22-23 season. But now a couple of years go by, and his percentage drops by over 10%. Why is that? Well, I could be wrong, but to me, it looks like he changed his jumper. Because if you watch back old highlights of KPJ knocking down threes in Houston, his jump shot just looks so much more fluid than it does today. And here's why. When looking at his old jumper, if you direct your attention to his feet, he's getting plenty of legs on the shot and elevating vertically when he shoots. Looking at his jumper now, he barely gets any lift, and he jumps out forward more so than he does vertically, which throws off his momentum. Most of his three-point misses either hit back iron because his arms are overcompensating for his lack of legs, or he's short because he just doesn't have enough legs. So hopefully the Bucks shooting coaches can restore him back to the above-average three-point shooter that he once was, because the 43% or so that he's shooting from three as a Buck feels extremely fluky. But even if the three ball is inconsistent, one thing you can rely on out of KPJ on the perimeter is good off-ball movement, which to me is the most overlooked part of his offensive game, as you can frequently see him cut into open space for easy looks around the rim, and he always seems to know when to fill gaps on the perimeter. But the last portion of Scoot's offensive game that I want to touch on is his playmaking. Similarly to Ryan Rollins, Porter Jr. is a guy who is capable of getting 2 feet into the paint and spraying it out to open shooters on the perimeter. But on top of that, he also does a nice job of finding bigs in the dunker's spot off of this penetration. In addition, his playmaking out of the pick and roll is pretty darn good, because whenever he's in these actions, he often turns the corner and draws the help defender at the rim, thus opening up a lob to the rolling big, which explains why the pick and roll with Giannis has looked so compatible, which is something that GA has been missing since the departure of Chris Middleton. But KPJ isn't just looking for his roller out of P&R actions. He's constantly reading the tag defender as well, and kicking it out to open shooters being helped off of on the wing. So his instincts out of these actions are pretty solid, but he can start to struggle with his decision making when opposing defenses send to or blitz his pick and roll. And because he's a score-first guard, he can get himself into trouble when it comes to over-dribbling or going ISO and finding himself in no man's land, as he struggles to pass out of those scenarios. Not to mention, whenever he leaves his feet to try and make a pass or make a read, he's likely going to turn it over, And overall, KPJ is one of those players where you've got to take the good with the bad, because he's going to have the highest of highs and lowest of lows. Which brings us to the defense. At 6'4", 203, with a 6'9" wingspan, Porter Jr. is bigger than most guards, so he does a decent job of playing physical at the point of attack, and his ability to navigate screens and stay with his man isn't bad. On top of that, given his size and length, he's decent at covering bigger guards and wings in the mid-post. However, he can tend to be a bit too handsy in these spots, and picks up fouls as a result. And sticking with that theme of being handsy, he can give up the occasional driving lane because he whiffed for a steal against the opposing penetration. And if he plays his matchup too close, which he does here and there, he usually gets burned. And he also gets burned by frequently biting on pump fakes. So in terms of point of attack on-ball defense, he's kinda just okay. Does some good things, does some bad things, but for the most part, just kinda, eh. He's a lot more impactful away from the ball, specifically in gaps and playing the passing lanes, as his combination of anticipation and active hands helps him force a lot of turnovers, especially from one pass away, because any sort of lazy passes with him in that gap will be taken. And whenever an opposing defender has their back to KPJ from one pass away, he'll immediately rip them from behind. Plus, any sort of dribble penetration that even makes its way towards his gap will be stolen like school lunch money. And not only does the guy tag rollers, but he reads the next pass as well should the roll man get looked off. However, because he's so active away from the ball, he does occasionally overcompensate a read and miss a rotation as a result. And like everyone else, he can fall asleep every now and again. But for the most part, his rotations are clean, and he's typically in the right spots defensively. And because he positions himself so well away from the ball on that end, he's statistically one of the best defensive rebounders in the entire NBA amongst guards. So all things considered, Porter Jr. is a much better defender than you'd expect. But that's all I've got for today. So let me know what you think about the recent play of both KPJ and Ryan Rollins down in the comments section below. And let me know how you're feeling about this Bucks team as a whole as we inch closer to the playoffs. But again, that's all from me, and I'll see you in the next one.